At this point, I'd like to invite Mr. Lynch, Mr. Schrader, if they want to come up and join us at the table. If you would like to present from the podium, you're welcome to, but please feel free to join us up next to Dr. Kim and Mrs. Ramich. I'll get started on my end of the presentation, and then I will certainly pass the mic. Okay, Mr. Nicholson, thank you for driving. So just some brief background here. Obviously, we've been having meeting after meeting after meeting for years now, and we had Mr. Schrader join us and PFM join us in the winter, I guess. We're talking February, March, kind of outlined the estimated costs, some square footage, what things could look like, what the taxpayer impact could be. And then we essentially said, okay, we're going to get to designing. We've shared some increased specificity along the way, month after month, of what the design looks like, where the estimate is, where the square footage is. And so each month we provide a little bit more information as we continue to progress in that work. So tonight's presentation is really about, again, showing a little bit more detail, but really talking about cost and the project cost buckets and the referendum discussion as a whole. So the objective tonight is for the community, the folks in the audience, and of course the board to understand where these costs came from and why the number is for the referendum that the administration is recommending, and then hopefully we would have a vote on a resolution for a referendum at next week's action meeting. So with that, Mr. Nicholson, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide here. So these are bullet points, agenda items here that we've discussed in the past, but just kind of adding a little more detail to our slides in these presentations. But we provided some data the last few months on why ninth grade would move to the high school campus, why all high schools in Bucks and Montgomery County have ninth graders on their campus, the exception being Central Bucks. They're moving to that model next year. Everyone else, ninth grade is at the high school. And really, it's because of a few things. One, academic preparedness, the curriculum continuity from ninth grade to 12th grade. And of course, our students always say, when they're in ninth grade at our middle schools, their teachers are always saying, now you're in high school now. Well, in North Penn, that's not true. They're in 3 separate buildings. Our resources are spread across 3 different buildings. And our students do not have the same opportunities in ninth grade that our 10th through 12th graders do because of that. Next slide, please, Mr. Nicholson. We also believe, and the research supports, that the social development and transition to adulthood are appropriate for ninth graders to be on the same campus as their 10th through 12th grade peers. I couldn't help but notice there are some videos floating around social media from the pep rally the other day, and just thinking that not only does our facility not allow us to do a full building pep rally and have certain events, but that our ninth graders don't get to experience some of these things. And again, I think the student experience, in addition to the academic endeavors, and we'll get into the academic component here in a moment, it's just as much a part of high school. It's the opportunities and involvement that our kids can have, everything from pep rallies to activities to clubs to sports. And our students are clearly at a disadvantage compared to our neighboring school districts and across the country. Mr. Nicholson? So we outlined in previous presentations that through these focus groups with our community, the priorities for this high school renovation are, and I will read them because I think they're that important, is inclusivity and accessibility, flexibility and adaptability, safety and security, collaboration, community, sustainability, outdoor connection and outdoor learning, and pride and branding in our facility. These are in no particular order. Next slide. Okay, so I do think it's important to note that the high school was built and opened in 1971, and when the facility was made, it was designed for 2,400 students. In the late 90s, we added K-Pod to accommodate roughly 900 additional students. No hallways were expanded, no spaces were changed. We added a building in the front. So all the throughways, all the arteries of the building are not bigger, despite the fact that we now have roughly 3,100 kids in a building that was designed for 2,400. Yes, we added classrooms at the front in K-Pod, but there's not additional gym space. There's not additional hallway space. The ceilings aren't higher. We still have clogs in EPOD. The building was built for 2,400 kids, and unfortunately right now we have 3,100 kids in it. So it is not as simple as a systems-only renovation in the opinion of our architects and, of course, administration here. So we really want to get into that. This is a not all-inclusive list, but just to give you an idea of some of the things that have changed since the 70s when the building was built, some of the opportunities that are available for kids. And this is just one slide, because the list could go on forever. But some of the programs that we have in school now that we didn't have in the 70s, we find a way to make it work. But I would be doing a disservice to this community if I didn't outline the fact that I don't believe that redoing our 1971 building with a systems-only renovation, with new paint, new floor, new windows, and new HVAC, will accommodate these programs the way that we would like to. So you'll see outlined here some options in art, engineering, JROTC, our preschool labs, some of our strength training and athletic opportunities. And then on the right-hand side here, you have some of our activities and athletics, things that just didn't exist in the 70s that we now have on our campus. So everything from field space to gym space to pool space. You see we didn't have water polo back then. And in addition to all the classrooms and the new technologies, our building was not built for these things. So, Mr. Nicholson, if you would. Mr. Schrader outlined that some of the things that we heard in these large group design sessions were the priorities being central spaces that tie together the day and evening events, some clarity to our circulation routes in the building. I believe we used the word wayfinding in that presentation. Grouping of primary functions into identifiable groups within the facility, shared STEAM and media spaces with access to the core learning spaces. He spoke a lot about the STEAM center there and things going out from there. And creating access across the whole building. Creation of day-lit teaming areas with access to those outdoor spaces and courtyards. Next slide, please. These are two quotes that, I won't read these, but these are two quotes that kind of emphasize, as we've done in the past few presentations, about why some of these environments are necessary in today's design. Okay, and our next slide here, I'll pass this to Mr. Schrader. You'll see his emblem there down at the bottom with his team. But this is really the site map. And Mr. Schrader, if you could just add some detail from last month's presentation, anything that has changed here.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Bauer. So you're going to see a site plan, a couple of floor plans, and then what we thought we would do is highlight some of the circulation routes through the building. You heard that circulation and just space for the 9th grade to be added to the 3,000 plus 10 to 12 grade students is going to require some additional circulation within the building, more creation of arteries and so on. But that starts at the site level too. And so what this is demonstrating is the removal of the transportation center at the top center. And so you can see the stadium working away across from that. There's additional parking there, which allows for the growth of parking that you'd see related to the total number of people coming to this building. And then the conversion of the area to the right of that, which is currently the radio station property. And so that turns into some additional playing area as well. We're trying very hard to maintain the existing bus circulation as you see it down on the right-hand side, but we've added additional bus circulation pull-off areas at the top of that area as well. So we've accommodated the length of all of those buses pulling up curbside. We've added a few roadways at the bottom as well that allow for the circulation of parent drop-off. And that area with parking combined with the area that we talked about at the top helps to provide the appropriate parking for students plus additional faculty that might come to this building. And then off to the left-hand side are the playing fields that were softball, baseball that get converted to multi-purpose fields. And then there's a large area of stormwater management required to accommodate the additional roof area of the building. And the building is shown kind of in a tannish white. The orange areas are the addition. The lower left-hand corner that the arrow was just pointing at represents a competition gym and all of the support spaces that goes with that. The J-pod area is the center part of the building that becomes sort of a common space similar to those of you who've seen the Upper Marion building. It's your full function, pre-function, after function space in the building, becomes dining, becomes everything else throughout the entire day. And so it's a very large space that would typically be dining space that gets used throughout the day from early in the morning till late at night. And then the area on the right, the two kind of triangle portions, represent three-story additions to K-Pod. So they come around the corner there as three-story functions. You're going to hear a little bit more from Jamie Lynch about how those factor into the referendum number. But those are additional classroom area so that the perimeter of the building becomes classroom area. The center part becomes the STEAM area, very much like what Dr. Bauer just described. So if we can go to the next one. This is a floor plan of the existing building plus the additions. And so on the left-hand side, you see a lot of green. The green area currently is athletic area, and in the future will be athletic area. And so what you're seeing is that plus the competition gym. The orange area in the center is that full function, pre-function, after-function space, plus dining, plus all-day long space that allows you to have this many students in the building. And at night gives you equal access to the gymnasium areas as well as to the auditorium areas. So that'll be the space that accommodates all of those functions day and night. The center part is where your current library is, that's orange. And that area gets added to and becomes kind of your STEAM center. So it'll have your science, your technology, the engineering, and the research spaces. And the blues on the perimeter are, starting on the upper left-hand corner, your A-Pod. And I'm going to show you a video of that. If you go over to the right-hand side, you see the 2 3-story classroom additions. And finally, K-Pod is at the bottom, and you're familiar with that space as well. So that's the plan. You see on the next one, the second floor of that, which is just a reflection of those floors going up, and then finally a third floor plan, which is the same. So what I wanted to share here in these videos, if I can go back to the first floor, I'm sorry, Mr. Nicholson. Yeah, there's a gray area that runs left to right in the plan. And that will become the new kind of circulation spine in the middle of the building. We're calling it Main Street. And off of that run all of the circulation routes. You heard the idea of arteries or arterioles running off of that to try to get students in a clean wayfinding way to each of these classroom areas, to the STEAM areas, and so on. And so we're going to show you videos of the common space, which is the orange. We're going to show you a video of the central Main Street that goes left to right. We'll show you a video of one of those classroom pods on the right, and finally we're going to show you a video of the A-Pod with the A22 room opened up so that it's the same as those other two spaces. And keep in mind that all of the academic spaces will be modernized, and they will feel like brand new spaces, but what this is showing you is how you might come into the building. Folks have toured a number of facilities on the eastern part of the state from the school district and have seen a couple of buildings that do things like this now. Particularly for the number of students that are going to be in the building, this will be an easy way for folks to have wayfinding throughout the facility and allow for the amount of dining that'll have to happen at any one point in time. On the right there, you're seeing the Audion and the nurses area, and this is the access point to all the circulation in the building. It'll give a clean, clear way for folks to get into the building and find their way throughout the building as you go. And at nighttime creates access to the gyms and to the auditorium as well. So I can't remember what the next video is. We'll see in 1 second here. Okay, so this is over in the proposed classroom clusters on the right-hand side. It's kind of a means to provide the ability for research, make, and present, so it allows for all of that happening in the learning areas. Also provides presentation spaces. This is reflecting a similar concept to the Upper Marion project that many folks have toured. Has classroom clusters around, and then the idea is that it's creating these courtyards in the middle of the building so that there's indoor and outdoor education that can occur from any one of these pods. And this is 3 stories, so this will be the same as the K-Pod, and we'll have the ability to circulate right from the first, second, or third floor of K-Pod to these structures. And the little key at the lower left-hand corner is trying to show you where in the building you are You can see the red area right now is around those 2 classroom pods on the right-hand side. So what you might not know is that you have a hidden treasure, and that is A22. Any of you who go in that space today, which one? 33. I knew I'd get one of the numbers wrong. So A33, thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Believe it or not, that's the existing space that's hidden in there. And if you're able to open up some of these walls around the perimeter of it, you're seeing the existing structure of the building in the gray. And on the perimeter of that, if you remove the block walls to the classrooms, this is actually what you have. And so this is a way to try to make that learning pod, which is a pod, similar to the balance of those new spaces that we're putting in. And then finally, the idea of the main street. And so the goal is to create a clean, clear path from that bus circulation route on the right-hand side of the building that I was identifying to the main commons area. So this is actually coming in from the commons area that we showed you as the first of the videos, and it creates a wide pathway through the building to allow the circulation of 4,000 students. And some of the branding that you heard Dr. Bauer talk about. It also gives you the ability to go left and right to all of the classroom clusters, into the STEAM spaces and so on. I think it's pretty interesting to see how this existing building can be converted within the structure of the existing facility and give you some of that circulation space that you're looking for. And I guess I want to emphasize one more time that all of the classroom spaces, all of the science spaces, and any other educational space in the building will be modernized to look like the rest of this. And you'll have a building in the end that will look like it was a new structure built on the site. And that's the intent of all of this. So that's a little sense of what the building could look like based on what Mr. Lynch is going to talk about next.
Terrific. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, David. If we move on to the next slide. Our job at Dewey Engineering was to take the concept plans that David's group has put together and perform an independent cost opinion on all of the details therein. And this has been a tremendous task in the past month, working with the school district, with the architectural team, with the civil designers, with the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing designers, with the educational team, the district's IT group, and everyone that will eventually touch a project like this in order to try to gather information to apply cost to what is a vision or a concept at this stage, for the purposes of giving you some independent cost information and allowing you to move ahead with this important decision on the referendum. And so what we've done, if we go to the next slide, and maybe we could shrink that just a hair. Is that possible, Pete, so everyone could see the cost numbers at the bottom? Is it possible to go up? Forgive us in merging 3 presentations. There's liable to be some formatting. There we go. So as Dr. Bauer listed on his title slide, we wanted to present cost in buckets, or in the areas in which cost apply for the project, and then also separate the cost that would apply to 9th grade coming up to the building and to the site, separate them out so that you would see a referendum cost and a rest of the project cost, as it were. And so, by example, the first component would be that associated with the transportation facility, which in any event with 9th grade coming up, or even if it doesn't, transportation is slated to move off-site. You've got a site acquisition cost, you've got a building to build site costs, you've got some traffic improvements that may need to happen depending on where the site is, and then there's a soft cost allocation. There's that wonderful term, soft costs. I should just start by saying, what is the soft cost? The soft cost is everything associated with a project that is not bricks and mortar and dirt and concrete. It's the design fees, the permit fees, the equipment fees, all of the insurances associated with doing work, contingency, escalation associated with executing a project. So by example, and as a part of the project, the transportation site, in moving that facility off-site, we've got a projected project cost for transportation that is $17.25 million. None of that is associated with ninth grade coming to the site. So as you can see, it's all associated with the project cost. $0 are associated with the referendum cost. And so I'll go item by item through the bucket list, if you will, and then I'll come to a sum total slide and help you to understand along the way. The transportation site building, incidentally, is based on concepts that were done earlier. As far as square footage, we know the number of buses, we know the number of vans, we know the number of staff parking spaces, and so that all plays into the site cost and the cost of the building. So thank you. On the next slide, this is a slide that demonstrates the off-site traffic improvements and hazardous materials abatement costs associated with the renovation of the high school. Studies have been done prior to Dewey Engineering coming on board that gave some indication of what would need to be done off-site to accommodate the traffic that is experienced at the high school as a result of the growth of the high school over the years. As obviously there hasn't been a renovation in a number of years, when the district goes for land development approval with the township, there will be traffic upgrades that are necessary, and they're listed here. Potentially a light at Valley Forge and Snyder, improvements perhaps at the Snyder entrance, also at Snyder and Troxel. There'd be improvements at the main entrance to the high school at Valley Forge Road. There's also a traffic impact fee for future improvements at Valley Forge and Sumney Town Pike. And then we've also included an allowance for right in and right out only at Sumney Road, where a connector has been proposed as a part of the project cost. This also is a cost associated with the renovation of the high school, whether ninth grade comes up or not. And so $4 million is allocated for those off-site improvements. $2 million is allocated for hazardous abatement associated with the high school. It all is in the project cost. None of it is over in the referendum cost. Okay. The first referendum cost is associated with the site. Before I split it out, just wanted to touch base, and I apologize that we've rotated the site drawing for you 90 degrees upward, but the total estimated site cost for the project is just shy of $40 million at this point. And that includes the athletic fields that David outlined as part of the site plan, the expanded parking spaces that will be necessary to comply with current land development codes, the modifications to the bus drop-off area and bus staging, a connector out to Sumney Town Pike to improve traffic conditions overall, and also the improvement and relocation of athletic fields, as you see, including relocating softball and baseball and making them synthetic turf fields, and also re-turfing the existing turf practice field that's below the tennis courts. The rest of the fields here shown would be new natural grass fields, and you can always do an alternate for sod and for other amenities. But that's what that $39 million represents. It also includes electrical upgrades to the site, the tennis courts, as I mentioned, all the earthwork necessary, underground tank removals that will be a part of the project, and all other facilities, also including the building demo and the radio tower demo in the upper portion of the site. So that's the all-in cost. If we go to the next slide, we've done the cost estimate to estimate the difference and the work associated with the referendum, which generally is relegated to that corner of the site that we're redeveloping, that is the radio tower site. We're relocating the softball and baseball fields. We're creating a new band field. We have expanded driveways and bus staging area. We have the staff parking associated with ninth grade. Ninth graders don't drive to school, so there's not student parking associated with ninth grade. and the requeuing of buses. That's all included in the referendum cost. It comes to just over 14 million of that 39 million. So there's the split, the first time we see the impact of ninth grade versus the site work that would be necessary at the school. If we go to the next slide then.
Can I ask a question? How was it split between the high school, is it a percentage?
It's not a percentage, it's based on actual estimated cost for the features. So it's not a percentage for site cost. I have an outline that shows what amenities are associated with ninth grade coming. And the other way to explain this is if ninth grade doesn't come, the softball and baseball field remain where they are, and they remain natural grass. So the cost of rebuilding two fields, making them synthetic, and putting stormwater features underneath of them it's what's represented in that 14 million, plus the asphalt, plus the parking.
If I may, Mr. Lynch, so option 2, if a referendum were to fail, we would still, I believe the designs that exist would still have athletic fields. So the difference in cost is what is represented here.
Exactly. Essentially, option 2 would be roughly that $25 million cost only.
So this is the difference in if ninth grade comes, then baseball and softball would have to move. They wouldn't be all natural fields up there. I think that Mr. Schrader had them as soccer fields or multipurpose fields in option 2. So these are the things that would have to happen as a result of the expansion.
Okay, so, and I don't know, do you want me to, I have questions, but if you want me to hold it, I will. If you prefer, I'll wait.
I think there are areas where you're breaking it down by percentage, and then in this case, like square footage wise, and in this case, it is actual, like the difference in option 1 and option 2.
Exactly.
Right, so maybe it'll make sense when all of that's out there to ask the questions at the end.
Yeah, why don't we wait till the end?
Okay,
That
fine,
way
all right. I'll do
we're
it.
not going down a path.
Okay, so that's the difference in site. Now, if we go to the next slide, we're looking at the difference in building. And what we're looking at in the concept plans and what we've worked very hard on with the entire team is that all told, we have 496,000 and change square feet in renovations. And we have in this plan over 310,000 square feet of new construction that's everything that's on the plan. Of that space, the amount of square footage associated with bringing ninth grade to the building is 167,716 square feet. Okay, I need that square footage to accommodate ninth grade in the building. We've gone around and around. We've worked with the educational program, understanding the number of classrooms that are necessary, the other areas necessary to accommodate ninth grade, and that is our number. All of that is in building additions, okay? So the cost associated with the referendum is the new construction of that 167 and change thousand square feet in building additions. It comes to just shy of $63 million, $62,893,500. The rest of the project cost is a combination of renovation of the existing building and the remainder of those building additions that are necessary for the renovation of the high school. So it's the 313.1 minus the 167. You'll get the number of new construction that's in that 180 number. Okay, so from a building perspective, project cost 180 and change, 62 million in referendum.
So if I may, just to provide some clarity, this is not as simple as a ninth grade building, right? It is through the design process and the feedback we were getting from the community. Do I think there will be areas where ninth grade classes are? Sure, in some cases, but I also think there will be fully integrated spaces. So calculating what is being renovated for ninth grade versus what is being added on is more complicated than this building is this many square foot and this many for this building. So that's why the intricacies in the explanation.
Exactly, and I can show it both ways. I could color spaces across the building associated with new construction for ninth grade. The fact remains that everything that's a dark color on this slide in the floor plans is new construction That portion of the work will be built first. It'll be used as swing space so that renovations can occur throughout the building. And then your ninth grade building program or educational program will be constructed around the totality of all of the spaces. And if I go the other way and say, what's option 2 include? It does not include any of the dark colored spaces that you see here. They go away completely. So that effectively is this piece associated with the referendum. On to soft costs. The next slide identifies what the project soft costs are for the total project. And as I mentioned, this is design and construction management fees, the township and conservation and DEP permitting required, the traffic impact fee, technology, the abatement consultant, utility fees, all of the things that are listed there. The sum total of those costs have come to just over $97 million. And believe me, the list of those costs is far longer than the summary purple that you see here. It's a long sheet in which we've tried to itemize based on our experience and also based on some information we got about the building. For instance, like the number of smart boards for instructional technology that might go in some 250 classrooms that would be in the building. Knowing what the cost is, being able to put that in. Same thing for security cameras and wireless access points. We did work with the team to figure out approximately how many devices would be there and put in enough that we would have coverage in the building. And so we've gone through, this spreadsheet really has about 60 line items in it, and we've scrutinized each one of them to come to these numbers. Go right ahead.
So one point of clarity here is the last line that you see, which is escalation and contingency. In this set of estimates, Dewey has chosen to put the escalation and contingency in the soft costs of the project. And the prior estimates had the escalation in the building construction costs. The contingency, though, did fall in the soft costs.
Okay.
You're saying they were broken out in the last, okay. Now they're combined, both in soft costs.
Correct.
Got it.
So when we go to the next slide, this is where I've used a percentage basis to create the split. And I promise you, this is the slide that has the most complicated math on it of the entire presentation, okay? So $97 million in soft costs, and the question is, how in the world do you determine how much of that is associated with ninth grade? And after we looked at it, the very reasonable solution was to base it on square footage of the building. And so at a total building size of 809,000 square feet and change, we've got 167,000, remember that number, always remember that number, associated with ninth grade. And that equates to 20.73% of the building. When we think of ninth grade in the building, you would say, well, it's one of 4 grades, so it's got to be 25%, right? Well, there are common spaces. There are other spaces associated with the higher grades. We've gone through this and tested it, and we believe that that's a reasonable estimate for what ninth grade really contributes to the size of the building. And so I applied that percentage to each of those line items of soft cost with the exception of one, and that's the subtotal for civil engineering and land development for the site. Because no matter what, those costs that are soft costs to design the site, go through the land development, and do everything associated with the fees, they are the same, really, regardless of which option we go with. The cost of the amenities are larger, but the cost to do all of the engineering is essentially the same. And so we left that number, that $625,000, in the project cost. And so you see the split here, 20 million and change for the referendum cost, for soft costs, 77 associated with project costs. So, to sum up, this is the summary slide, and it lists the option 1 project cost for each of the buckets that I've just described and the referendum cost. And you see that the option 1 project cost is just over $306 million. the referendum cost at 97,000,003 and change for a total project budget at this point of 403,699. And then below is the sample or draft referendum question that would be before the board at its next meeting in the amount of the 97 million and change that we worked with your referendum consultant on as far as the drafting and your solicitor. So that really, this slide really sums up the cost. It again identifies how many additions and how many renovations are associated with the project and gives you a total project cost opinion, again, on a concept, on a vision, but it's something that we believe is achievable. It sets the bar for what the design team, the construction management team, and we as a district team have to design too. We have to do better than that, and but I don't want to go too far and too fast in pushing a number down on you that I fear may only go up. So this is a good starting point, and with contributions or with grants or with additional work on where we precisely and surgically renovate the building to meet the goals that you have, we can find some more savings in this, I think, together as time goes forward. But I don't want to go too far too fast with you. One last slide that I have is really just for you and also for the community to understand that if the referendum should not pass, what comes out of the project? And if option 2 is pursued in the event of a failed referendum, 9th grade would remain at the 3 middle school locations. And as a community, you've discussed the impact of that and the work that has to happen to accommodate them in the future at the middle schools. Transportation will still be relocated off-site regardless. If option 2 is pursued, there would not be the connector to Sumningtown Pike that's shown in the plans. Food service would remain where it is, and a commons for it would not be built. The new performance gym would not be constructed. The existing would be renovated. The softball and baseball fields would remain where they are, and they'd remain natural turf. The library and A33 would receive really modest renovations as opposed to what you see in the video shown tonight. There would be no modifications to the educational spaces. There'd be renovations only. So it would be floors and paint and possibly windows. And then we'd have to add in the cost of approximately 15 million needed to construct temporary modular classrooms so that I would create swing space so that I could renovate and run around the building. So it is a very complicated chore and task that you have in front of you, but these are some of the things that you as a board and then you as the North Penn School District public need to understand, that if the referendum doesn't happen and we go to option 2, these are the things that would not be included in the plans provided.
And maybe just one clarification to one of the calculation pages, that 167,000, almost 168,000 square feet of building program for 9th grade was not a percentage basis either. It was used to generate the percentages. But that space was a calculated program based on how many spaces you needed to support 9th grade. It wasn't just a grab out of the air, it was an actual program. And you folks will remember that prior to even going to these conceptual designs, we had building programs developed around each of the grade structures, and that was the quantity of space required for 9th grade. So it was not an arbitrary number.
Mr. Scrocky, if I may, the referendum number, we've been talking about an estimated, I think it was roughly 95 million, 94.7, something like that, since roughly this time last year. And you said once we set that number, we cannot go above that number, right? So I want to point out that this is the point where that's the number. If we take a vote next week, this is the number for that addition. Right? Like, cannot, illegal to go above this number.
Right, and any debt that you would borrow in excess of that number wouldn't be subject to the Act 1 exception. So that's the limit. That's the amount that would be eligible for the Act 1 exception, what is stated in the actual resolution.
Everything else must fit within Act 1.
Correct, the general fund budget, yes.
And so when you said months ago, like, whenever we set that number, this is that number now.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Casa, you have your hand up. Mrs. Stoll, are we ready for questions?
Yes, I think we are. Okay.
you.
Mr. Casa, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. I was wondering if on this slide, and it reminds me of the one since 1971, you could probably have 10 more slides after this, but it doesn't mention, that band space has always struck me as well. So should the referendum not pass, I don't even know how you even try to put lipstick on some of these rooms, or, the arts, which are just overflowing right now with students. Can someone just speak, to maybe those two items and some others, so that the community and the board understands it goes well beyond just these bullets?
Yeah, so I think what Mr. Casa is referencing is the fact that our choral and music spaces are not ADA compliant. So students with mobility issues, students in wheelchairs, do not have access to certain points of those spaces. Through a systems-only renovation, we do need to bring the building up to code. So those spaces would need to be accessible, but they would not be everything that are in this design. I think that's fair to say.
Would they be
Thank
the
you.
same
And they would-
space, though? Like, you wouldn't,
Yeah.
like, because I think also there's a question about size, right? Like, just we're saying that this is a building that was designed for, 75% of the capacity that we currently have. So in a $250 million renovation, are we still going to be able to expand a lot of these common spaces and hallways and whatnot? Or is that something that in a systems renovation, we're just going to have to live with exactly the way the footprint looks?
Yeah, the footprint will be the footprint. I will say that I believe the option 2, there was a little red sliver on that drawing, and that was the only building addition if we don't move 9th grade, and it was simply to extend that exact area that Mr. Casa is speaking to. I think right now the ramps are so steep, the hallways are so narrow that we can't put an ADA, what's the word I'm looking for, compatible ramp in with the pitch to provide access safely. So we need to expand that area to make sure it's accessible. But that is the only space in the entire building that will be expanded.
Are there any other questions or comments? I know Mrs. Wesley's got.
I'm sorry.
No,
It's
you
okay.
know,
I'll
you said
be-
you
I'll be
told
eff-
us you were gonna ask
No,
questions.
I'll try and be really efficient. So I'll start with the specific questions. So the geothermal additions, I understood, and maybe I'm mistaken, that they were being implemented in the additional space, the 167,000 square feet for the 9th grade center, or, I'm sorry, the 9th grade addition. So does that not happen if,
Pete, if we could go back to the site plan.
and then I have another question, and I did talk, I did have a quick conversation with Mr. Schneider. If this turns out to be something that can help lower this cost by still being environmental stewards, could we consider doing geothermal at the new bus transportation center?
I'm going to answer that one first and say yes, because you'll have more space. Geothermal is understood to be a higher first cost
Yep.
for any owner, but is, because of its sustainable nature, commonly has a lower life cycle cost, but there are systems that are comparable as far as life cycle cost to geothermal. So in answer to your second question.
Sorry.
At transportation, the opportunity could exist.
Okay.
So test wells would have to be taken, and we'd have to determine if that was an appropriate way to go.
Okay.
As far as this building, the history on geothermal was that for the additional classrooms that would be put on, the location of the well field would be in this area between the school and the residences. And when our mechanical and electrical engineers took a look at it, that area is also presently taken up by a new stormwater basin that'll be required. And so it really limits the area. And we found that the well field dimensions were such that it's actually wider than the area that's existing outside of that area. And we also know from a construction phasing standpoint that installing a well field of that size is difficult to do in one summer. And you certainly don't want to do it on the bus loop that you would need when students come back to school. So we found very quickly that doing geothermal for that 167 is not going to be an easy task. And so
Okay.
instead, we've gone back to an idea of a central plant and perhaps a smaller geothermal field for a smaller portion of the building. So that field could be relocated, it could be under some of the athletic fields, it could be under the parking lot in the
Okay.
back, but it would be smaller. And so that's contemplated in the cost of the project.
Okay.
And understanding also that having multiple types of mechanical systems in the building, it presents an operational challenge. It also presents a little bit of a cost challenge.
Sure.
And so that's what we found when we were doing the estimate. It was our recommendation that we downsize geothermal or possibly relocate it. And that's where we've landed today. So there is some geothermal in this, in this estimate. However, it's much smaller than it was when we
Okay,
started.
good, all right. And then you'll consider possibly including that, maybe the bus.
All along in this process, because it's so long, we know that one of your goals as a board is to introduce sustainability.
Yep.
So that's high on the priority list. If we're able to take advantage of the act that's out there now, whether it's through photovoltaic or geothermal or other means, and it may bring grants with it, all of that comes into play as far as how we actually execute.
Okay, thanks. Can I ask a few more? Okay. Regarding the ceiling height, particularly in the big open areas, the common area, what is the cost for building high? I mean, there's no material, it's just high. So would we save any money if it was a little bit lower, or it would be negligible?
So I think what you're seeing for the most part here is presentation of ideas that people have generated over the last 3 months. And what's going to happen for the next 15 months, if the referendum should pass and this project proceeds as you see, is that constant tug of war between what you're doing and what you're going to pay for it. And that process would only start after that point in time. So I know that the team has some basic dollars for it, but they're really looking at these areas as areas that cost more per square feet and areas that cost less per square feet times the total value.
Okay, but just from a building perspective, a design perspective, when you do something like this, does it add a lot of cost onto the construction or not? Just
Sure, in the new areas,
ballpark.
it does not add a lot of cost. In the areas that
Okay.
are renovated, it adds cost.
Right.
And so A33 would be one of the more expensive areas to expose roof because you'd be breaking through the roof area.
Okay, so going forward, when we start to look at the menu of things to
Right.
do, knowing, what that cost is, does it make sense to actually look at reducing it, eliminating it, because it is substantial versus something else that is the bang for the buck because it doesn't have a really high cost
Right.
associated with it?
I think the entire team is going to try to maintain some of the ideas you've seen,
Yep.
but the real money has to go to the educational space.
Correct.
That's where
Okay.
everybody's going to focus the dollars
All right.
most profusely.
Okay, so that's, all right. So when you were speaking about the fields being where the radio station is, what's happening with the antenna then? Does it go away?
So my understanding is that the cell tower that's there would remain. And that
Okay.
we have one radio station working on one of the towers there now. They would all likely come down and a new antenna constructed, which would actually be much smaller for the existing radio station.
Okay.
There's also copper wire that is kind of in a flower pattern that goes between those towers in the ground, and so that has to come out as well.
Okay, all right, and just two more questions. Why is contingency and escalation, particularly contingency now in soft costs? What is your philosophy on that?
I can show contingency in the hard costs. I can show the contingency in the soft costs. For consistency, we like to show the building cost and the hard cost and isolate contingency on its own because it's really made up of a construction contingency, a design and estimating contingency, And we've got, for this project, which is heavy in renovation, a phasing contingency.
Okay.
As we do this work, there will be temporary walls, there will be dust-proof walls, there will be negative air machines, there will be all kinds of things to allow for the safe passage of students both in the building and outside the building. And so that's where we're focusing our contingency, and we've isolated it and identified it that way so that as we could do continuing estimates, if we want to pull, if we want to adjust from that, we can. Escalation, completely separate, and that calculation gets more complex as we go through the phases of design, and we start to really zone in on how and what we escalate to what year.
Understand. Mr. Schrader gave that presentation, so that made sense. But I think my question more was about the contingency. And I have one more question. The very last slide, it hits me as huge, the number of things that won't get done if we do option 2. It's like, why? It just gives me pause. Like, why? Why won't we get any of that, or why will it be so reduced?
I think the short answer is our financial projections, if we go with option 2, which is about 236, I believe, was the number, the cost that is still necessary for all 3 middle schools to house 9th grade, our borrowing capacity would be limited for those future projects. And that's why none of these other things could happen with option 2, because of what we still have to do around the district.
I understand. Okay. And we do have to spend the 15 million for those temporary space modulars, whatever.
Correct.
That is a total waste of money. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a
Thank you.
couple questions.
Yes, of course, go ahead.
Could you go back to the picture slide, the one that you were just on? Oh, sorry, Pete. I'm looking at the wrong person. Yes, that one. So I think having kids in the high school and having been through this, I think about kind of the things that students and families deal with, and are any of those going to be solved through this option? So one of them is parking. So a lot of people don't know that we have a whole lottery system for parking at the high school, which sometimes can be difficult for students who either want to take a course off campus, have a job, that kind of thing. And so does this at all, this option, does this at all expand the parking in terms of what we have currently and resolve even a little bit some of that? I know we're bringing additional students on campus, but if we were bringing additional students, then they wouldn't be drivers, but we still need more
Parking,
parking
right.
because currently we do a lottery system.
Yeah. So
Plus there would be more staff. So I was just wondering about the parking situation.
yeah, so we actually believe that from a staff parking standpoint, it's essentially a wash. And the reason for that is you would no longer have the bus drivers parking on the property. And we would no longer have vans obviously for transportation and specialized transportation. So we believe staff parking will be a wash, if not perhaps a little bit less. However, I think, Mr. Schrader, I asked you this question last week. I think you said 480 spaces additional?
My memory was 430, but I think it's somewhere right around there. So on top of that, you're getting an additional 400-plus parking spaces to accommodate staff.
Is that either way, Dr. Bauer? Like,
It is not.
Or is it?
Well,
I mean, is that one of the things that gets lost on the list?
So we would reduce the number of staff members who are parking there because transportation is moving regardless, but I think we had that estimated at around 100 vehicles. So yes, it would be 100, it just wouldn't be the additional 400 to 500 extra spots.
Mm-hmm.
This lot is completely new, right, in this option. If we go to option 2, this lot gets appreciably smaller, and this parking that's right here goes away. But this gets smaller, so the net is still more parking on the property.
So if you could show, so Jamie, bring your, or Pete, bring where like A lot parking is right now. Yeah, like right here. This is roughly where A lot parking is right now. So there is parking there where our bus drivers park. So that's about the size of what's represented by the mouse, but all that other stuff is additional.
Thank you. Any
And
further-
then, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then, in terms of the educational benefit, because I'm an educator, I'm always thinking about kind of that piece. And when I look at that last list, you can go back to the last list now, that you had, there's so much loss in the educational benefit, from kind of just trying to put Band-Aids here and there. I'm wondering also if I don't see these on the list, but when we talk about enhancing areas where there could be vocational opportunities, opportunities for some of our students with special needs to be in like transitional programs, or is any of that included in what could be the basic renovation in terms of just any of those things? I mean, we've talked about wanting to expand and have more STEM opportunities, more hands-on opportunities for students. Some of our students who get waitlisted for North Montco opportunities, can any of those things be enhanced in the renovation that would be option 2?
So other than the previously mentioned expansion to the music area, the square footage is going to be the same. The walls won't move, Mr. Schrader, correct? Floors will be replaced, new paint, new lighting, new systems, but the actual structure will not change under option 2. So if we repurpose some spaces, and we would have to rob Peter to pay Paul, if you will, eliminate some programs to add others, whereas with option 1, obviously we have a little more flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions?
Yes, sorry,
That's
I have
okay.
a few. The tennis courts, the addition of the 2 tennis courts, when I was at the community meeting, a member of the athletic department actually shared that by not having those 2 courts, we can't host boys and girls tennis events at our school. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are actually short 2 courts compared to most high schools.
Okay,
So
so
the
this-
option 1 reflects that addition.
So allowing our tennis teams to play at home and to host, that brings that up to that. With regards to the traffic off-site costs at $6 million, is that an area that could be where we could explore the possibility of grants? And within this, and within the budget, the line items that we're beginning to think, are we earmarking or kind of noting areas that could be potential for some cost offset through grant funding?
Absolutely, through PennDOT, DCED, those opportunities always exist. There is a grant that has been made available through the township to install sidewalks on Sumneytown Pike, as odd as that might sound, due to how heavily trafficked it is. And so that is an area that's ripe for grant opportunities. As soon as the design would commence and land development would start, that would be the time to go after those types of opportunities, including Montco 2040. Anything else that could qualify to help us in those regards.
And where would the role of grant writing and the prospect research and the monitoring of all that, where would that be housed? Would that be housed with you, with the district? Would it be a team approach?
It's absolutely a team approach between
Okay.
the civil engineering, the construction manager, the district itself, depending on what the grant is. Those types of grants are not very difficult to put together. They take some time for review and approval and chasing. That's really the biggest exercise associated with them. So I think, those pursuits are valid. In some cases, there's not a lot of dollars available. You really want to spend your time going after something where you're going to get solid dollars for those improvements. But the opportunity, that's the area that's most ripe for opportunities.
Okay. If that is a team approach and it is something, could we consider incorporating our internship project into that effort? So the prospect research, writing, pulling some things together is an incredible skill to be able to gain through an internship project. So,
I might also note that the RACP grant process is out there in cooperation with the township. The next opportunity to apply and get allocation for your project has not opened up yet. We're prepared to put that allocation submittal in, and it takes some time, but time is what you've got as far as this project goes, as far as before it actually starts. but it's ripe for an opportunity for a RACP grant. So that's something else that would benefit the project.
Okay, and one last thing. There was something new that I noticed this time, or it was an addition to the imagery, but in the kind of lofted or the staircase auditoriums, we've had lots of conversations about concerns about mobility. And there was something in this one that I noticed where there was one design that had little landings off of it. And if there's room for those little landings, I pulled up an image. This is not perfect, and I don't even know how to explain it. Is it possible to incorporate a slow grade ramp with the stairs, at least in one of those, so that we could we incorporate a design? Is it too late? Is it something we could think about so that there could be ways of making sure that students with mobility issues have access to those spaces?
This is the issue with these types of spaces, and it's one that we're all grappling with because you're seeing these in a lot of buildings. That concept, as long as you have the width, that is a beautiful way of solving the issue. And just so folks know, it's a crisscross of a ramp across the stairs, which allows a wheelchair to move back and forth up the space. So
And
really
even if we
neat
had a
idea.
compromise, because one of them was kind of at an angle it was wider at the beginning. Even if we had a compromise to allow that for the first half, maybe. But there was one that showed, there was an image that showed like a little, it was off to the left, right.
It's that one that you have there, and you can start to see the landings on the back side there. You're exactly right. You're picking that out well. So it's a question of how you get to that, and I think with some of the things you have on the screen, you may be able to do that.
That landing, right?
Yep.
So with the landings in that, does that give us enough width to have a little bit of a ramp up part? I love those little landings.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Ramich. Pete, could you go to the A33 image too? Because Mrs. Ramich has been a part of a lot of our meetings, and this has come up in every meeting.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a commitment to resolve that. I'm guessing it's the,
At least finding a path to a midpoint is what.
there you go.
Yeah.
So see that landing there in the middle?
Yeah.
I don't think that was there initially. Maybe I
Right.
missed it. But
Well, it's interesting. That's the back side of that before you ascend the last couple
Right,
of stairs up. Believe it or not, it's there.
this is actually, I know this is maybe counter to what most are thinking. This is my favorite image because it is
me
a
too.
structure that currently exists in our building. Those beams exist. Just taking, the walls out, the roof up.
Let's be real, the roof is not there. Everything
Sure.
else is, everything
The
else
beams,
is there. Yes, sorry, Jamie.
Are there any
Good luck
other
with that roof.
further questions?
I just want to say, we have heard through meeting after meeting after meeting, we did 6 months of work in 6 weeks, and really appreciate the efforts of both of you. And Jamie was also planning, his daughter was married on Saturday. So he's had a lot going on in his own personal life too. But it has been, we hired Dewey in July? All of this work and all of this estimation and all of these spreadsheets have happened since July. So it's a ton of work to try to get us ready for this vote next week. So if there are no other questions, I did not recommend approval for this item to be placed on the October 19th action agenda.
So can I have a motion? No.
Nope.
It's, hold on 1 second.
So this is just to be placed on action, Pauline?
Yeah, and you can
So
make-
it's not a vote to approve, it's to place it on next week's agenda.
Gentlemen be here at the action meeting when we want to ask questions? I mean, I thought it was supposed to be like open, like, why wouldn't we be allowed to ask a question and get an answer?
Mrs. Broad, can you just wait for one, like, we have a motion on the floor. Let's take the vote, and then I'll ask this, okay? All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Are there any further comments or questions? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And I would just like to say, this is like a once-in-a-lifetime project. I think Mrs. Braccio, Mr. Malagari, and I, we're all North Penn alum, and we know what didn't happen in the 90s, right? So this is our second shot at at trying to do this. And if we don't do it now, I don't know that we'll ever do it. So, and I know Mrs. Braccio and Mr. Malagari can attest to the fact that when we go on the tours, the schools look exactly like when we were there. Right, Mrs. Braccio?
I don't have an issue with changing the school.
No, I know you don't.
What I have an issue with is, for instance, these cathedral ceilings. It may not add to the cost of the construction, but it's going to add to the cost of air rises. So if you have tall ceilings with no space nothing for it, you're gonna have hot air rising up and the kids are gonna be cold. So, or, you know, so those kinds of things, I don't hear any solutions to, or, you know, why would you even consider a cathedral-type ceiling when your heat is lost up at the rafters?
All right, well,
And I think that's a good point, and I think we did talk a little bit about utility costs. So what may be lost or gained at the last facilities and operations meeting. But I think, like Mrs. Wesley said, like we're inferring, the designs are this, we may have to get to a place where we lower a ceiling, or we kind of go, okay, what do we do? So I think all of this is still very much under consideration as we move forward. But the utility costs and questions around that were discussed at the last facilities and operations meeting.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize, and for those who have not been a part of a process like this, and not that I've been doing this for all that long, what we are doing right now is we have a very strong estimate for the costs of the electoral debt. And so what you just voted on was to move this to an action agenda for next week. Let's say that is approved next week. Then we will have a date and a time for our special election or our primary, whatever it is, for the referendum. After that, there's still a ton of work to be done, a ton of design, a ton of planning. We just had to get to a point where we could have a figure that we believe to be, as we've discussed a few moments ago, that we cannot go above, so that we can move forward with which design are we doing and where are we going. So how high the ceilings are, how much glass, all of that is still to be decided. We have a long ways to go, and I think you said we're going to be designing for the next 20 months. So long ways to go, but just trying to get to that number which we presented this evening. So.
Dr. Bauer, following up from, can I speak? Is it okay?
Sure. No.
I'm not sure you can right now.
I'm all choked up. So moving forward, and I know we're not there, for me, I think it would be helpful when, we talk about the cost of raising the ceiling, that it would be construction costs, it would be material, it would be the whole construction cost issue. But also, too, I think, to Mrs. Braccia's comment, it would be helpful to understand the operational costs that the district would be incurring, which will definitely increase. I mean, energy costs will increase. But I think for us to make it a really informed decision, what will the capital costs be, and an estimate of what the operational costs will be. So I think as a board member, I would want to know that, because then I feel that, all right, I've got the capital side going, but what's the operational side?
Yeah.
Fair?
I agree with you that we aren't there yet, but I also agree that it's not
I'm trying really
unreasonable.
hard not to,
Get too excited.
Yeah, what,
I'm
how far up
excited.
are we? Like, we were at 100?
Well, I know, where's Mr.
Now we're at
Schneider? He
30,000
always
feet?
tells me. But I think that as we become more refined, more granular about this,
Sure.
I think that would be something that I know I would want, and I think it would be helpful for the board to understand those costs going forward.
If I may, we can help you with those all along the way. And we can also help with the PICO rebate program that'll apply heavily when all of the light fixtures and the HVAC equipment is changed out, because that will reduce costs, result in rebates, and reduce kilowatt hours.
And, the ENAC Club presented a number of months back about LEED certification, which is an extremely expensive endeavor to reach and then maintain. However, if there are aspects, specific points that are included, that we might be able to go back to PICO on for any rebates or grants or whatever, that would be welcomed.
One more thing that's changed. Our industry's changed significantly, certainly in the last 10 years, but more in the last 5, in that in the very short time that we've been doing this process, what you would have gotten 10 years ago is the plan that you saw, those plans, because this is conceptual design. We have, as we said, 15 to 20 months of design, and that's going to be that tug of war of this should go up, this should go down, we need to make that space smaller, there's so much to be done, And what unfortunately or fortunately happens is because of the video capabilities of all of our software now, we're showing you things as if they're done. And those are just ideas that came out of all these things that folks talked about in these various community meetings. They're going to be refined from this point forward. And the refinement means reducing things for costs and trying to make sure things are operationally and maintenance friendly to the school district. So this was just a flavor, and anybody who takes the videos as the final design, give us 20 more months to generate those videos. This was the quick shot.
Do we have any follow-up on solar options? Do we have that included in the project anywhere at all, or was that deemed too expensive?
It's
impractical?
something that's being entertained for almost all the projects we work on, and we're really excited about the Inflation Reduction Act providing some capability for that, because that's one of the things that's giving us some project money, hopefully in the future, for a bunch of projects.
Great.
So the hope is that that can be included as part of the project.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments or anything? No? Everybody good? Well, thank you, Mr. Schrader. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We really appreciate your time presenting tonight. Very informative. And we look forward to seeing more from you guys moving forward. So, and thank you for all the work. I know Dr. Bauer keeps saying how much work you guys have done in such a short time, so we really appreciate that.
I also have to give a shout out to Mr. Schneider in the audience. He's been integral in all the efforts, working with these two in particular. So, and Mr. Scrappy, he's all right, but we say no for good things. So.
I just want to thank everyone for such a rich conversation tonight. This has been really helpful, so thank you.